Hello, my name is Dr. Fonda Goldman, and I am a licensed naturopathic physician with a private practice in Stratford, Connecticut. Today I wanted to talk to you about Marma Therapy and specifically the Ayurvedic energy points on the ear. Before we get too deep into this, just as a note of caution, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For any symptoms that are severe or worsening, please contact a qualified medical professional. And it's always important to determine the root cause of any disease and to develop a comprehensive treatment plan, of which Marma can be a part. So, for those of you who are new to Marma Therapy is therapy used in traditional Indian medicine or Ayurveda. It's over 5,000 years old, and some people kind of consider it like an Ayurvedic acupressure. So, again, it's an energy modality. Excuse me. So, let's get into the points here. So, Karnapali is the first point, which translates into natural point to pierce. And part of the reason why it's called this is because the earlobe doesn't really have very many blood vessels. So if you do pierce it, it actually doesn't bleed too much. So this is the first point. The energies that it invokes are the pranavayu, alochika pitta, and sadhaka pitta. If you don't understand these terms, it's not super critical, but if you're a deeper student of Ayurveda, this will be you'll be familiar with these. Pranavayu is a kind of like an air or wind type energy in the body. That's what circulates our vital energy, or I believe in Chinese medicine it would be considered qi. Alochika pitta is basically a type of fiery energy, and it's the fiery energy of the eyes for us to perceive and take in images and process them in our mind. And then sadhaka pitta is the fire of the mind. So this is the overall global working of the brain to take in sensory input and then make sense of it. Okay. So in any case, the indications for this point are the reasons why somebody might use this point is that there's local effects. And as you'll see, all of the points that I'm going to talk about today have local effects. This one's particularly good for ear congestion. And it's actually also good for eyes. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, Alochika Pitta is the fiery energy kind of involved with vision. And so this point is good for eyes and vision. It's also good for different things related to the head. So different kinds of headaches, such as periorbital headaches, which is a headache that is kind of behind the eyes or around the eyes. Also a temporal headache or a headache on the side of the head, and migraines can be helped with this. Also vertigo, ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and stress can be helped by using this point. The second point is called Karnapala, or it's also called Karna Urdhva, which means top of the ear or apex of the ear, and that's where it's located. And the energies at this point helps to balance are the pranavayu and the apanavayu. So pranavayu, again, is the general sort of free-flowing energy of the vital force. And apanavayu is a different kind of wind, and it's the kind of wind that has in the body that has sort of a downward directional momentum or movement. And so we'll see that because of that, this point is very helpful with issues in the lower body. But if we go through the full list of indications for this point, again, this point also has local effects for different aspects of the ears, and it can also be helpful with the face, the neck, TMJ, or the mandibular joint, cervical lymph node adenopathy, and mumps. So if you have some swelling kind of on the side or slightly in the back of the neck or slightly behind the ear or slightly in front of the ear, this can be a helpful point. It's also helpful with the mind, so it's also helpful with ADHD, mental alertness generally, and vertigo. And as I mentioned, the apanavayu energy is helpful with the sort of downward movement, things that are involved with downward movement. So things in the lower body such as low back pain, sciatica, the coccyx, the tiny end point of the tailbone, the colon, and also the root chakra. And or it's also known as the Muladhara chakra. And so this point, from a spiritual perspective, is actually helpful with awakening Kundalini energy or spiritual energy that's sort of coiled up. That's what it's thought. It's coiled up at the base of the root chakra. And then as that spiritual energy is liberated and travels up the spine, it can really start to awaken, spiritually awaken the mind and the being of the mind. So there you go, the second point, Karnapala, or apex of the ear. The third point is actually a kind of a pair of points. So there's sort of two with this one. It's called Karnamula, and Karna again is ear, and Mula means root. So Karnamula means root of the ear, and there are two different locations. So one is if you slide your finger behind the ear, where there's a depression behind the posterior side or the back of the mandible or jawbone, and then the mastoid process, so the kind of first jutting out point of the skull. There's depression here right behind the ear. That's what I would refer to as K1. K2 is behind or posterior to the mastoid process. So if you have your finger in this depression between the mandible and the mastoid process, if you slide it down slightly and around towards the skull, more towards the back of the head and the neck, you'll find a little depression there, just slightly behind the ear, and this is what I refer to as K2 or Karnamula 2. So they do have some mostly similar effects, but some differences as well. The energies that these 2 points are good for balancing are the Pranavayu, Apanavayu, Sadhaka Pitta, and Tarpika Kapha. So again, the general free-flowing energy of the body, the downward movement winds of the body, the processing unit of the brain, and then Tarpika Kapha. So this can be like the kind of steadiness of the mind and the being. It's important to note that you shouldn't put much pressure on these points, because if you press too much, you can actually make someone pass out. So just be careful here. And so indications for these points, again, are local. So things like earaches, tinnitus, hearing problems, TMJ, or temporal mandibular joint problems, mastoid infection, facial nerves, such as things involving facial nerve, or diseases involving facial nerves, such as Bell's palsy and trigeminal neuralgia. And it can also be helpful with the mind. So vertigo also, as for the other points mentioned before. K1 specifically is better for periorbital headaches or headaches behind and around the eyes. And K2 is better for suboccipital headaches. So headaches that are kind of at the back of the head, right at the base of the skull. And then these points are also good for kidney function. So in order to summarize what we've covered today, that all 4 of these points that I've mentioned have local effects. So number 1, Karnapali at the earlobe is one of the best for congestion. Point number 2, at the apex of the ear, is helpful with the ears, the face, the neck, lymph nodes, and TMJ, or the temporal mandibular joint. And points 3 and 4 are good for things like earache, tinnitus, hearing, TMJ, mastoid infections, and diseases related to facial nerves. All 4 of these points have some relationship with functions of the mind. Points 1 and 2 are particularly helpful for things like ADHD. Point number 2 is good for general alertness. All 4 points are good for headaches, but different kinds of headaches. So points 1 and 3 are good for periorbital or headaches, or headaches that are near the eyes, around the eyes, behind the eyes. Number 1 is especially good for temporal headaches or headaches on the side of the head. Point number 4 is particularly good with suboccipital or headaches that are in the back of the head, right below the cranium. And point number 1 is also good for migraine headaches. Point number 1 is also good for stress, and all 4 points can actually be used for vertigo. Point number 1, or the earlobe point, is good for the eyes and vision. And then we have the last 3 points are good for the lower body. So point number 2 is good for the low back, sciatica, the colon, and the root chakra. That's, if you remember, this is the point that it can help to lift the kundalini energy up the spine, and help to with spiritual awakening. And points 3 and 4 are good for kidney function. All right, so just to, again, bring it all together and integrate a little bit. So there you have it. The Marma points for the ear. If Marma Therapy is of interest to you, I have other videos on Marma Therapy, beginning with Marma points on the hand. And if you're interested in Ayurveda generally, I have several videos on Ayurveda. So hopefully those will be helpful to you as well. So thank you for your time, and until the next one, take care.